All right. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. If you're like me and still adjusting to the time zones, good morning and good evening as well. Thank you for joining us today at DEV305, where we'll be talking about our journey building an educational startup on AWS. Here we go. My name is Christy Peralt. This is my partner, Matt Coulter. We are both co-founders and architects at Teach Me AWS. We are also both AWS heroes. We have been AWS community builders. We are AWS user group leaders in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So we are very involved with community. We've definitely, probably between the two of us, done well over 100 talks, presentations, courses, podcasts. So we've definitely been very involved in the AWS community for the past couple of years. If you're not familiar with the Heroes and Builders programs, so we do not work for AWS. We are just community evangelists, folks that work closely with other community leaders and sort of build up our AWS communities where we are from. We recently had our very first AWS Community Day in Belfast this year. We are also organizers for CDK Day. So we have been around for quite some time now. So today we're going to be covering a little bit about the sort of education problem that we've seen working in these spaces with these community leaders and community members. So we'll talk a little bit about how we got into looking at education, and then what our journey looks like. And a bulk of this will be talking about how we built our platform and what it sort of looks like, the kind of architectural decisions we've made, what we've built so far, some of the challenges we've come across, and some of the solutions and decisions we have made, as well as kind of what we're looking towards next as we continue to build and develop this platform. So as I mentioned, we're very involved with the community. We work a ton with community leaders, builders, architects, kind of every level, every shape, every size. And over the past couple of years, we kind of get this question. Sometimes it comes up organically. Sometimes it's kind of more indirectly. And how do you learn AWS? Right? As builders, we're constantly, having to learn, upskill, learn new skills, and this sort of comes up quite a bit, and maybe surprisingly, maybe unsurprisingly, it's not typically in certifications. Usually when folks are building and looking to use AWS and deploying to production, or maybe when they're using and building with money of their own on the line, what they're actually looking at is community content. So there's a few we've shared up here of some of our friends that are also AWS heroes and community builders. We have newsletters, there's articles, there's blog posts. There's so many different forms of community content out there. And this tends to be the spaces where people are really going out and learning about something. I want to deploy X on AWS. I want to work with this new feature. I want to build this new product. So you start to look through all of these articles, these blog posts, these newsletters, and I don't know about you all, but usually when I'm building something, I spend 2-3 hours doing this. My coffee is cold, and I've got 30-something tabs open. So the problem is it starts to leave you exhausted. So you start thinking like, this is so much content, there's so much out there, how am I possibly going to learn all of this and know it? And then on top of that, you need to start working to implement that service code. You haven't even gotten to the point where you're building what you need to build yet. So all of this research, all of this development, trying to find exactly what you need to answer that one specific question has been really difficult over time. And then if you work in an enterprise or in a highly regulated industry, you have to worry about things like corporate compliance, spaces where you're not necessarily going to get the answer from those articles. It's very specific things to your company, things that you're working with. I have to have a certain backup policy, or I have to have this certain service tagged, or I know that it needs to go to my pipeline and it needs to be done in this specific way. And typically, those are not things that are covered necessarily in all of that community content.
Okay, so I'm going to just take a diversion from what Christy's been talking about to talk about infrastructure as code for a minute, because if anybody has been following the content I've been putting out over the past couple of years, everything that's just been mentioned, I've pretty much said that I've solved it already with a previous product that I built. So I wanted to address that rather than just skip over it in terms of cdkpatterns.com. So a couple of years ago, I was on the big stages talking about how it was really hard to build on AWS, and I went out and talked to the heroes, used the well-architected framework, brought it all together where you could learn all these well-architected patterns, clone them, deploy them in one command, and then learn from them. And all the documentation from all the heroes would be right there, so that from your perspective, it speeds up everything previously mentioned. Now, cdkpatterns.com, it's not dead, but CDK Patterns birthed pretty much serverless patterns, or the serverless land website. So basically, I was one person building a collection of open source patterns, and AWS looked at it and said, if we put a whole team behind this, it might have a bigger impact on the community. So if you look at serverlessland.com/patterns today, there is still a collection of patterns in CDK, CloudFormation, Terraform, you name it, they're on there. So the reason why I'm saying that we're pitching differently to what I said previously solved this problem, because this is still an educational product that we're talking about, is that originally, CDK Patterns had 22 patterns, which covered about, I'm going to say, 95% of common use cases for what people need. Today on serverless land, a couple of days later, there's over 800 patterns sitting on that website. And you don't know when you pick it up, realistically, can you use it in production? Is the way it's configured right for you? Could it be more cost optimized? Should you be using Terraform? Should you be using CDK? It still introduces all of the same problems. They're back again. And given that this is a moment to readjust and go, should we just kick off CDK Patterns again, or should we, based on what's around in the community today, solve the problem from a different angle? And that's why Teach Me AWS is going to be different to what CDK Patterns was. And before I hand back to Christy, you might be thinking, hold on, you've been completely replaced in this space because you can just use LLMs and Gen AI. There's things like Amazon Q out there that you can just say, as an AWS hero, build this infrastructure as code for me. And that is completely true, but it does not take away from the fact that you still need to understand what you deployed, and you need to run it on day 2. So you still need an educational angle, even if we can get you from 0 to 90 in 5 minutes. So it's not that these things conflict, it's just that they all tie in together. But I'll get us back on track now and hand back to Christy.
So rude. I'll have to hold it against you later. But this is exactly where our heroic sort of journey has begun in this space, working with education. So our mission is to create that one-stop solution for learning AWS services and how they connect with each other. So this is at its core an educational platform really focused on that kind of more intermediate, advanced level and those real-life use cases. There's so much content out there today for Hello World examples and documentation and new features and things that come out. And we really want to focus on that space where services are working together, connecting together in real-world problems. So if any of you have ever asked an engineer or an architect or a builder, I want to build X on AWS, how do I do it? And they answer, well, it depends. This service is built for you. So we've run into a few challenges as we've built this. Definitely some that we predicted for sure, and some that were more of a surprise. And we knew right off the bat that we have a little bit of a lack of trust in current platforms today. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Twitter, but that is definitely one example of areas where we want to own our own content and have a place where we can store that, keep that, maintain it for ourselves and for other community contributors as well. If you haven't yet heard of this thing called AI, we now need to worry about protecting our content from AI scrapers and bots out there. So we'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide as well, but it's definitely a big concern for us and something that we needed to build for in this situation. Because we will have large amounts of data, and our entire platform is our data. It's our collective knowledge. That is what we are sharing, what we are presenting in the form of videos, blogs, podcasts, articles, case studies, and we want them to be free. We want some content to be free, and others to be paid for behind a paywall. So a lot of those blogs, those podcasts and things will need a way to surface free for users, and then also to have that paid for path as well. And then on top of all of this, we actually work full-time. This is not our full-time job. So we do not have the extra money, the extra time to spend on some of these really heavy lift sort of items. So we are doing this on a shoestring budget, as we will dive into today. And it's something that we have some limitations for and we're very well aware of, and has definitely led to a lot of our architectural decisions. So we're kind of going to put our money where our mouth is here, and our first contribution to our platform is our own case study. So you'll see up here our actual architecture. So this is what we have built today. This is our platform. There are a lot of different colored boxes up here. So we are taking advantage of quite a few AWS services. Actually, when we were filling out the info form for this session, it said, pick the 3 that you will be talking about. And we looked at this and thought this might be the hardest part of the entire presentation, is trying to boil this down. So we'll talk a little bit about each of these pieces in a bit more detail, but at a very high level, so you as the user will reach out to our service at teachmeaws.com, and you will reach out to Astro deployed on Amplify, which is taking advantage of an S3 bucket for the static content, as well as a Lambda function for the server-side rendering. Now, if we didn't have to worry about a login, AI bot scrapers, or any payment information, basically everything else on here wouldn't have mattered. So most of the rest of this architecture is for security, protection, and working with our API endpoints for free versus paid for content. So because of that, we needed to implement Cognito, and then we need to worry about our DDoS protection. So we have a firewall with AWS WAF. We are using CloudFront for our CDN, or content delivery network. And then we have a whole bunch of business logic with API Gateway, Lambdas, DynamoDB, and Amazon S3 to kind of host some of this content. So as you can see, this is a very serverless architecture. And we preach a lot about how serverless is very easy to use, and it's something that we are experts in. But this can get pretty complex pretty quickly, which is exactly why I'm going to hand it back to Matt to do the next part.
So let me talk you through a couple of the key features of the platform that we've built from our perspective, and part of why we built it. So the first thing is we can have static content that is just content that we would have written traditionally on like a blog somewhere. That can be static and no change for that. Free for everyone. Bots can scrape it if they want. But we can also have dynamic content that knows you're the person that logged in, so therefore you're going to be interested in this particular article. We can start to tailor the developer experience to what the developer needs. It also means that we can have complete flexibility, because yes, the architecture diagram Christy just showed is a very serverless architecture diagram. So people might be thinking that we're locked into AWS, but to be honest with you, I don't think it would take us very long to pivot. So this gives us complete flexibility to stand up a platform, experiment with user experience, and rapidly innovate towards what the community actually needs, instead of getting bogged down and spinning up a bunch of infrastructure that may go away tomorrow. The last thing on this slide I just want to point out, because I'll switch to the next one, is we are big into the AWS well-architected framework. I mean, Christy or I could talk for the whole hour on this framework, but we're going to resist. We have done it in the past. Meet us in the hallway, we'll do it again. It's based on these 6 pillars. They're all pretty self-explanatory in terms of what the category is, but the high-level explanation of what I'll give for this, if you've never heard of it, this is the playbook, the manual for the cloud, written by the experts at AWS, and it's written in these categories. So you can actually go in and you can go, okay, operational excellence. Do we know if our application has gone down before a user rings us and says, hey, teachmeaws.com is a blank page? If you can do that, you've got good operational excellence. And if you go to the well-architected website at the bottom of the page, it has a white paper, talks through everything, as well as it has a specific lens for serverless technology to give you the best hints and tips for how you should build stuff. So this is how we build, and just thought it would take a couple of minutes to stress that for you all. Okay, so challenge one, let's dive into this a bit deeper. And Christy and I were actually talking to one of our fellow heroes this morning, Andrew Brown, who runs the Free Code Bootcamp. He's awesome, and we were talking to him about this exact problem over breakfast today, because there's multiple problems within this one thing, because originally you could build your platform off, say, Twitter combined with YouTube. And the aspect of that is we now live in a world where realistically, whatever platform you're using, a billionaire can buy it and your audience can leave. Or they could decide to monetize the content, and then what they do is they start turning some dials, and if you're not charging for your content, they just don't show it to anyone. So there are a bunch of things that it just makes sense that in the current situation that we wanted to own our own platform so that you could have trust that we're not trying to sell data or anything. There's nobody's going to influence this. This is just a pure education platform for the community, and there's always going to be a home for our content. And to build that home, we decided to build it off Amplify and Astro. And then we're going to use that to share it to all of the other social networks that everybody's already at. We're not expecting day one that everybody's just going to go, yes, teachmeaws.com, forget Twitter, forget Blue Sky. We're going to be there. We're going to be with you. It's just that's not going to be the only place that the content's going to live. And that way, if we are in enough places, hopefully, that means that realistically, we can always stay up somewhere. So why is it based off Astro? Originally, the first version of Teach Me AWS was built on Eleventy, which, if you don't know, is a static site generator, and it's awesome. I love Eleventy. Use it for pretty much everything else. But whenever we worked out that we were going to have some dynamic interactive elements to this application, because realistically, we can go any direction with this. We could have videos embedded. We could build quizzes on the page. Sky's the limit. Whatever you want on the site, we can do it. And with a static site generator, I was going to have to either pull React in myself and start writing a bunch of JavaScript on top of the server-side process, or Pivot Framework. And whenever I looked into it, Astro has this thing called Astro Islands, and they're incredible. You can have static content the same way as Eleventy generates it, but you can say this tiny section of the page, that's a React component. And this other tiny section over here, that's also a React component. And it just sorts it out. It just goes, OK, they share these pieces of code. I'll pull it down once. The page will render. It will just work. So inside one framework, you can have dynamic content and static content and server-side rendered content. And it's not locked into any particular framework. So right now, we're using React components, but we could switch to any of these other popular frameworks, and I'm sure even more. And why Amplify hosting? To be honest with you, I think Amplify hosting might be one of the best-kept secrets in AWS. Because when I talk to people about this, they say, I've tried Amplify, and then they're talking about the Amplify CLI or the Amplify React components. But Amplify hosting is this amazing, simple service that you can just go, there's my GitHub repo, there's an app in it, deploy it, and it goes, oh yes, I see that in that repo you've got an Astro app. OK, I'll set up the build pipelines for you, and it just works. And it is inexpensive, and it is reliable as anything. And it's backed by CloudFront underneath, which means you get this global CDN. Whenever I've tested it against other services, it's always like up there for terms of like response times. And it means that if you're building an app completely on AWS, everything is just native. It just works. It just takes another layer of you don't have to hop to another bill, another anything. It's just there. It's fully integrated. And it had already an unofficial plugin for Astro server-side rendering. So why not? We've used it for things as big as CDK Day before that's had huge audiences. The downside of Amplify hosting, I'll not pretend it's perfect, is that you don't get to control the CloudFront distribution that it gives you because it's a hosted service, which for most people is fine. It's just that we like to tweak things. So we'll be going in and saying, oh, I would like that to be that, which you can't do. But that's OK for the purpose of this. And then there's a couple of elements in the UI that could be considered a little clunky. For example, the DNS settings are not done per branch deploy. They're just at the top level. So if you've got multiple branches deploying multiple versions, it can be awkward to do DNS changes. But on the whole, I love it as a product. It's just simple to use, does what it's supposed to do. The more important challenge that we had to solve, because we all know we can deploy a website, we don't really need anything complicated for that, was how were we going to protect our content from bots scraping it? Because we want you all to be able to access it, and we want you all to be able to access it as easily as possible. But if you put in the special robots.txt to say, please don't scrape my content, there's like 1 out of 500 scrapers that actually respects that. So we decided that we were going to venture into the world of authentication on AWS and use Cognito. If you've never used Cognito before, this was my personal reaction to this. I have avoided using Cognito my whole career because I haven't needed to. And the messaging I always got from everybody else that used it was, Cognito is a very inexpensive option for doing authentication for user apps in the cloud, but you pay for it in the hours that you've got to spend configuring it. But for this, I thought, you know what? Let's take the time. Let's see what it's like. It couldn't be that bad. So let me introduce you to the 6 steps of Amazon Cognito login. The first thing you need is a user pool, and that one is in the name. You've got to have users for your application. They're stored in a pool. Then you need to have a client, which allows your website to interact with the user pool to say, OK, they're definitely a user. After that, you need some way that people can say, I want to be a member of that site. And then you need a way that they can say, I am a member of that site. I want to log into that site. But at that point, they still can't do anything because you haven't actually given them any permissions. So you need to go to your AWS infrastructure and actually say, this person from this user pool is allowed to do this. And then after all of that, their tokens expire. So you have to make sure that you're using the refresh tokens to make sure that the user doesn't have to start the whole process again. But let's dive a little bit deeper. So the first rule of Cognito Club is not nobody talks about Cognito Club. It's that once a user pool has been created, it cannot be modified, and this is not a soft rule. And the problem with this is they're actually very secure with user passwords. You can't access them, you can't export them, you can't do anything with them. So therefore, if you need to make a tweak to an active user pool, you need to create a new user pool and then start a migration plan for that. And there's 2 options. There is an official route where you can, every time somebody logs in, migrate them to the new user pool, which will take about 37,000 years. Or you can just take all the users, migrate them, give them all random passwords, and then email them all and say, you need to reset your password. So it's painful if you set up your user pool wrong, which is why I'm stressing it for you all here, because I had to do this about 1 million times in the course of this. I might even need to do it again for all I know. I had to read a lot on the internet to understand the implications. The Burning Monk is out there. He has amazing content on LinkedIn as a fellow hero, if you Google the Burning Monk Cognito. And also there's Martin Kilbride, who has an article out there on read-only versus modifiable attributes in user pools. Because out of the box, the email address or the user ID that you use to log into Cognito is not case sensitive. That is a setting that you have to pick. If you don't pick case sensitivity for your user ID that they use to log in, if my user ID is Matt, all lowercase, then someone else can sign up as Matt with a capital M, and all of a sudden, then they can go back in, change their user ID, and start trampling on other users. So it's really important that you make sure that users can't modify any of their attributes that you don't want them to. And bearing in mind, it's not through your UI. So the tokens that they get given, they can go direct to the globally available Cognito service and change them. So that's why I'm stressing it, like, very important. The next one is, out of the box, you will get an ID for every user in your user pool, but you don't want to use that ID because it will cause you problems later if, for example, you try to migrate user pools because it will generate you different IDs. So you want to make sure as users are created, you set your own. Simple but effective. You need to decide early, are users logging in with an email address or are they logging in with a username? And it doesn't sound like a big choice, but with a username, a user can change their email pretty easily that's used for your service, but with an email address, it's probably stuck. Multi-factor auth, hopefully we're all using it for everything at this point. You got to make all those decisions. And then the last one is groups. Out of the box, people are just people in your user pool. So you need to decide admin, premium user, basic user, band. You know, you need to have groups, and you need to work out a strategy for how you're going to get people into those groups. As I say, amazing content on this from Jan, so please go read it. The next thing is you need the client that allows you to interact with your user pool from an app. This one's a lot easier, low stress. The only decisions you need to make on this is the refresh token, which is the thing that allows you to keep a user logged in. You can allow a user to stay logged in for up to 10 years. Your choice, anywhere between a minute and 10 years, I think it is. That's your only decision. From here, I actually reversed it from this. I talk about registration and login. Originally, I got the login working and thought this was easy. I'll do the registration flow. The registration flow is incredibly complicated for Cognito. And whenever, it was back in July that I was doing this, but as of this week, there is a brand new version of the Cognito hosted UI. So the reason why we didn't use the Cognito hosted UI is because it was quite basic 6 months ago. It kind of would have been a weird experience that you would have got redirected to a site that looked like AWS and then redirected back again. Whereas now, it can be completely branded like your company. There's a bunch of extra features, so use the hosted UI. But if you do want to build your own experience for login and registration, this is how it works. So once quickly, I'm not going to go through this multiple times. The user enters your site. A form is presented that's like user ID, name, whatever, email address, whatever fields you demand for that user to sign up. Cognito will then use SES, which you have pre-configured to allow to use your custom domain, to send an email to that user to say, here's a code. The user then has to come back to your site and enter the code into the site to confirm that they are indeed the person that was just on the site. From that point, I then had to set up a Lambda function that could take a secret that Cognito gave me and convert it into a QR code that you present to the user. Turns out Python is the best language for that, if anybody is wondering. The user scans the QR code, opens their multi-factor app, they get a code, put it into the screen, send that to Cognito, and after all that, the user is not logged in. That just sets up a user in the app. From that point, you now need to start the login flow with the user. And I must stress, the user can leave your app at any of these points. So it's an ever-expanding circle of you need to make sure that at any of these points, if an error hits in the back end, if the user gets fed up, something goes wrong with the network, that the user can recover. But the login flow is actually pretty all right. This one's as you expect. You hit Cognito, username, password. Cognito comes back with an OAuth challenge, and you go to your app the way you always do. Get the code, 60 seconds to type it in, and it sends you back 3 tokens. Associating your Cognito user pool with infrastructure on AWS. This was another interesting one that got me. So this is AWS CDK TypeScript. If you've never seen it before, hopefully you can read it. I didn't know what size the screens were going to be before we got here. But basically, you can say for this user pool by this Cognito ID, there is an out-of-the-box user pool authorizer function. What that does is says anybody in this user pool is allowed to do anything on this service. There is no further restrictions, or there are no further restrictions. So that's all users can do all things, which took me a while to work out. I couldn't do much with that. So after that, you're really going to be building a custom authorizer function to do this. And that's not that complicated. The custom authorizer function just has to take in what you're trying to do, compare it with what user pool you're in and what list of permissions that you're allowed to do, the scopes you define, and then send back, say, OK, that's fine, or that's not fine. The catch-all with the custom authorizer function is if you just take the request that they bring in to say, I want to open teachmeaws.com/patterns, and you say yes, and they try to open /patterns too, if you, out of the box, use the standard caching on this, it will come up access denied because you said that user could only access patterns. So you either have 2 options with this. You either need to make sure you're not caching your authentication request, which is expensive. Don't do this, but it will work. Or you need to make sure that when you've returned that response from the authorizer function, everything the user can do, bundle it in, cache it for a long time, and you will live a happy life. Just lessons learned. I spent a solid 2 days going, why can I open this screen and not this screen? And then to talk about the tokens that you get back from Cognito, there's 3 tokens you get, varying levels of please don't lose this. There's access tokens, user tokens, and refresh tokens. The access token is the one that includes the least amount of personally identifiable information in it. The user token, as is in the name, includes stuff like your email address and things, or your user ID. Ideally, you don't want to be passing that one about subsequent services underneath your fronting API. So ideally, you want to be using the access token, but it's a huge debate online. This was talked about which token you should use, and it's very specific when you should use each one. So I'm not going to offer an opinion on that. I'm just going to say use the access if you can. The refresh token, like I mentioned earlier, can live for up to 10 years. So you do not want to lose that one, because if that gets compromised and you give it to someone else, that's a long time that they can be pulling data from your website. Okay.
I told you I gave him the complicated bit. So Matt just went through and talked about hosting our website as well as protecting our content and the login flow. None of that matters if we don't have storage or content to store. So our third challenge here is that we have massive amounts of content that we're going to want to store here. I mentioned earlier, we have big plans for our video courses and content, blogging, articles, newsletters, hopefully letting other community contributors contribute to this as well. And overall, it's just our collective knowledge over the last decade plus of learning about AWS and cloud that we need to store, maintain, and secure. So in order to do this, we decided to go the route of Amazon S3, DynamoDB, and caching. And a big piece of this is we needed something that was secure, something that was really easy to use, and cost effective. Because as a startup, and as a very early startup, one of the big things for us is we're going to be growing at a pretty unpredictable rate right now. We don't have a great idea of how many users we'll have. Hopefully it'll be a lot. Hopefully we'll be storing a lot of content and have a lot of contributors. But with it being so unpredictable right now and with our costs low, it makes sense to stick with some of these more serverless services. So if we go back to our architecture diagram from earlier, you'll see that I have circled 3 different sections where we are utilizing Amazon S3. And this was a fairly easy choice for us. Some of this is kind of baked in, but S3 makes the most sense because we have a ton of different media files, different multimedia things that we're uploading. So S3 allows us to handle all of those different types of media files, text files, Markdown, HTML, MP4s, whatever we want can be put up there. But each of those 3 S3 buckets serves a distinct purpose in our architecture. So the first is alongside Amplify, and I mentioned earlier that is our static hosting for our website. We also have CloudFront on there that was also connected to an S3 bucket. That is actually all of our images. So any of our banner images, any images that we're putting in our blog posts, we have put in that S3 bucket with CloudFront. And honestly, what that is doing is just giving us a nicer URL to be able to access all of our images at images.teachmeaws.com. And then finally, kind of our main bucket is all of this content storage. So all of those things that I've been talking about that we're going to be producing and putting in there, probably eventually a case study on this as well, will be saved in that S3 bucket. So why do we still need Dynamo? As Matt has mentioned, going through the Cognito flow, we have user data. We don't have a lot of user data, but we still need it. We still need that to reference. It's very basic. You'll notice if you go to our website that we are literally just asking you for your name and your email. We do not want to be in the business of keeping and selling user data by any means, but that does not mean that we can throw it away either. So DynamoDB, as you know, serverless hero, I feel like I talk a lot about serverless services and talk them up quite a bit. DynamoDB is really inexpensive for scaling up and storing data. And that is ultimately why we decided to go the route of DynamoDB to start here. However, DynamoDB can get very expensive once you start getting into more complex queries, doing table scans, and throwing in large amounts of data where you're going to have to do a ton of read and writes. And you really need to understand what your access patterns are up front. So you really need to understand what you're going to be pulling from the table, when, why. And that is probably one of the hardest concepts in Dynamo to grasp, is doing those access pattern plannings and figuring out what your keys are going to be, what you're going to be utilizing the most. So as I mentioned, we are not collecting very much user data. And this will be pretty infrequently accessed. I don't see us really pestering people very much on coming to our platform. This is mostly for you and for us to maintain a sense of, maybe what your membership tier is, whether you're part of those banned users or something along those lines. And we'll have very predictable interactions with this. Like I said, we really don't have a use case where we're pulling this data very much at all. So we know pretty upfront that this piece of it, at least, is very predictable. So you can cache us making more improvements with our caching as well. So we are doing client-side caching, and this is mostly for all of you, right? We want to improve this experience for our users and not have you frustrated sitting at a loading screen the entire time you're using our service. So we keep this environment specific to keep our costs down. So for instance, in production, we cache for 7 days. In dev, we cache for 1 day, and then we don't do any local caching. So this helps you all, as our users, improved user experience, better performance on the application, and kind of just a best practice to follow. As well as it helps us because we don't need to pay that much for keeping that stuff cached for you all. So then we have the challenge of how are we going to structure our free versus our paid for content. And I think we actually thought that this was going to be a lot more dramatic than what it actually ended up being. But we need a way to make sure that the user experience for both folks that want to come on casually and read a quick blog post or watch a small video, and for folks that want to come in and maybe purchase a full-scale video course that's hours and hours long, we want to make sure that that experience is seamless and easy for the users to adopt. So this diagram actually starts from the right-hand side and comes over. But our solution for this is implementing that API gateway, a Lambda function for our authorizer, as well as our trusty S3 buckets. So the flow as it stands today is Matt or I will go into our GitHub repo and we'll type up a nice little article in a markdown file. We commit that up to our GitHub repository. And then we actually take advantage of GitHub Actions here, where a GitHub action will build that into an HTML file, and that gets uploaded straight to our Amazon S3 content bucket. And then from there, when a user goes to reach out and pull that content, it'll go through that local cache, our Astro front end, and it's going to hit that Amazon API gateway and say, do you have access to view this content? Is this a free blog? Is this something that's premium content that you may or may not have paid for yet? And that's what that authorizer function is handling for us. So it's making sure that those users have access to the content that we're uploading to that S3 bucket. So this is a relatively simple flow, depending on how much we grow and kind of what areas we're leaning into. There is possibility that we kind of branch into more of the enterprise corporate company structures as well. This may change, this may grow, but for now, for our community contributions, this is plenty for that use case. On the last one, we don't have any money. So we are completely doing this with a little bit of duct tape and good faith right now. We are a startup. We completely do this in our own time, weekends, evenings. This is our own resources. Thankfully, a perk of the AWS Hero program is giving us some credits to help with our run and grow costs here. But unfortunately, everything does have a price tag these days, whether it is that transparent or not. So this is where we jump into our serverless technologies. I mentioned earlier that our architecture is very serverless heavy. I think that's pretty apparent. And it just really provides us with inexpensive options for us to get started. And that's mostly where our expertise lies. So over the years, as we've worked with folks that have adopted serverless, maybe haven't adopted serverless, worked with it, we have learned it's not necessarily the easiest to jump into, to migrate to work with. That being said, we know it quite well. So as the main architects on this application, it was the easiest for us to implement in these scenarios. And because of that unpredictable scaling, this really suits the serverless workflow really well, since we will be scaling up and down, unpredictable rates. Hopefully we see a spike after this talk as well of people joining. So it's definitely unpredictable right now. So this includes, Amplify hosting, API gateway, Lambda, Dynamo, WAF, and then additionally some other tools that we utilize and take advantage of that are not necessarily serverless, but definitely fit into that serverless mold. And that is AWS CDK as well as AWS Lambda Power Tools. So about 2-3 years ago, we were both on stage a lot sharing about serverless, what it was, why we choose to go serverless, what it affords you, so on and so forth. But that was 2 years ago. A lot of content has come out since then, and this question has been answered over and over and over again, both by us and by other amazing content creators out there as well. But we have really established this quite a bit. And if you haven't really heard the term serverless, I haven't really worked with it, honestly, you can probably Google AWS serverless and get a ton of articles that answer this question and dive into whether or not this should be, the use cases for you. What is much more compelling, I think, here is taking that a step further and saying, instead of why serverless, we've answered that already. How has choosing serverless impacted our other architectural decisions and how we have built this application? So what has this maybe allowed for us to do, afforded us to do, or other things that we've been able to take advantage of because of the choice of going serverless? And it's not always positive, but there are definitely opportunities, tools, and technologies that have helped us along in this journey. So the first is with observability. If you have ever worked with AWS services, probably in general, you know that sometimes observability is not always the easiest thing to work with. Because we are taking advantage of serverless, all of our compute is with Lambda right now, and that allows us to take advantage of the Lambda Power Tools library. So if you haven't seen this yet, this is a very, very powerful library. It is mostly for Python right now, but there is a TypeScript version as well that is kind of more in early development, so might not be as feature complete as Python is right now. But this allows you to create more robust logging, tracing, and metrics for your applications pretty much out of the box. This is super easy to use. Honestly, it is an import statement, a statement to instantiate your logger, tracer, and metrics. And then you can do even very basic class level annotations to take advantage of things right out of the box for you. So for instance, your cold starts are a quick annotation at the top, and it'll give you your cold start time. And then on top of that, if you do want to customize this further, there are plenty of features and options in here. One of my favorite ones is being able to send metrics straight to Datadog. They make that really easy here as well. And this team has actually been great to work with as well. They're very open to features and suggestions and kind of growing this space. So this is something that we are taking advantage of in our application to enhance that logging, the tracing, and the metrics. Logging in particular, it really helps us understand, gives us more robust statements, especially when we're doing all that troubleshooting and trying to understand, maybe where things are going wrong, as well as tracing those events through our serverless application workflow. And I know I've already talked about DynamoDB quite a bit. I did hit a lot on the cost factor of that, but choosing to go Dynamo as well has led to some other, maybe unintended benefits, but definitely benefits all the same. So as I mentioned, we were very intentional about this, and it's forced us to really focus on what is important. What is the bare minimum that we need from all of you for our user data? And let's not go any further than that. Like I said, we are not in the business of collecting your data, selling your data, doing any of that. So what do you absolutely have to join us and to be on our platform? So this has really led us to focus on what's important. So you're not filling out 20 different fields and giving us your credit card and doing all these crazy things just to view an article. This has also kind of in turn helped us to prevent any complex queries. This table is super simple right now. There's no need to dive into some really heavy, complex running processes to pull out any of the users. We shouldn't be doing large table scans or those heavy read-write operations. So this is really useful for us. And in addition to that, it does give us the option to grow further in this space. So we can add on more fields if we want to. We can add more keys to our tables for more access patterns. And we can also add more tables. So if we don't have our membership tiers up right now, it is all free content at the moment. If we do start to develop those things, we can add a membership table. And we can do that instead of kind of piling into this one area. So this could be something that potentially changes in the future. I want to stress that we didn't sit there and go, we're serverless, so we have to pick Dynamo. We did have some conversations about whether or not RDS is a better fit for this as well, if that was something that we wanted to take advantage of. But as I said, cost and the unpredictable scale was really something that we were focused on, and just knowing that most of our data and content are really living in those S3 buckets and not necessarily on this table. And then, of course, we take advantage of AWS CDK. So serverless technologies fit really well with the CDK. It is a very strong pairing, and it allows us to continue to be flexible, but also leaving that room for growth. So a big piece of this is, we now have access to constructs and patterns that we can take advantage of. CDK is pretty mature in this space. It's been around for a few years now. We know because we run the CDK day. And there's a lot of innovation that happens here. And some of these constructs and patterns are actually things that we have also previously contributed to those spaces, so we can know and trust those things. So we can take advantage of these when using and building our application. It also simplifies our architecture considerably. Instead of having 100, 200, 300 lines of CloudFormation code, we can bring in a construct or a pattern, and it can be as little as 5 lines of code. So this helps us out quite a lot. I think you would actually be surprised to see our code base. The architecture diagrams, I think, show it more complex than the actual lines of code end up being. And as I mentioned, this sets us up really well for continued growth. So CDK is connected to a lot of other technologies. There's CDK for Terraform and working with Kubernetes and a whole bunch of other services. I actually think I saw an announcement from Pulumi about working with CDK literally yesterday. So this is continuing to grow and something that we'll be able to take advantage of long term. And again, this is a service that we both have very extensive knowledge in. So for us, this was easy to adopt and bring into the application. So this is an actual screenshot from our AWS account. I told you we were being very transparent today and sharing exactly what we are doing. As you'll notice, you can see right when I had to submit the deck. So this is halfway through October, so it is a little old, but it is still trended about the same way. And this cost on our y-axis here, this is not a multiplier. This actually costs less than $10 a month. So this is cheap. When I say that we are on a shoestring budget, we are on a shoestring budget. And as you can see here, most of this cost is our WAF, which is mandatory for what we're doing. So not really too many opportunities to save on cost there. Not that we really need to cut it much more. We also have our Route 53 up here, and Amplify is the green bit as well. And I will be very transparent and say that this is pretty much our infrastructure costs because, as we said, we kind of soft launched this in July. We don't have a ton of users. We have a couple articles and blog posts up there. So this isn't with heavy traffic. This is with, basically our infrastructure out there. So we do expect to see this to potentially move up a bit, but that is the advantage of using our serverless resources and services. It has kept this really low, and will hopefully continue to keep this very low as well. So that being said, if there are any investors out there that have some money burning a hole in their pocket, what we would do if we had cash flow. So what is something that we might improve on this or build on this? And as I said, this is very active development. What we're showing you today is exactly what we have built, pretty much nothing more and nothing less. So there are some areas that we would definitely invest more heavily in have we had that cash flow. And it may surprise some of you because, again, we're serverless heavy and we have the C word up there, containerization, which is kind of scary. But load balancers, like I said, we're very optimistic. We would like to think that we're going to get a lot of traffic, and we want to be able to take advantage of kind of load balancing some of that for improvements on performance. Since we are very early days in a startup, serverless does make the most sense. I don't think we would change our mind on how we've built this so far, where it's at. We're very happy with it. But as we kind of become more of an established brand, bring more people into this, we would hope to kind of see that some of that may start to level off, and we'll have a much more predictable flow, much more predictable traffic, a better understanding of the types of content we had. I think as Matt alluded to earlier, if you want quizzes, we can do quizzes. If you want to have presentations on there, we can do presentations. We'll have a much better understanding of where all you are at and what you're looking for and how to build for that. So at that point, we may consider walking away from some of these serverless services in favor of doing containerization, since it's something that's a little bit more predictable. And as Matt says, it keeps us more flexible with moving this around. So we're not completely vendor lock-in. We're very happy with where we're at and what this looks like now, but it's definitely something that we could see ourselves working towards. And finally, in the metric space. So I mentioned taking advantage of metrics with Lambda Power Tools. Those go directly to CloudWatch, and then you can customize and send it to Datadog if you want. If you don't know this, CloudWatch can get very expensive very quickly. And obviously, metrics are going to be hugely important to us. This is something that we're going to look to understand, where you all are going, what content types you like, how busy our traffic is, and then usability metrics and things like that. So if we had more money there, I think we would invest a lot more in that space, take advantage of more of those custom metrics that we can build and create using Lambda Power Tools, maybe other services, maybe setting up a Datadog account and forwarding things there as well, and kind of doing more data manipulation and showcasing of that. There's even things like QuickSight and stuff that would be really awesome to dig into. So these are spaces that unfortunately aren't really a reality for us right now, but would be something that we would look to grow into. So as I said, this is very active development. We are continuing to build on this, to grow on this, to learn for sure. We've definitely learned a lot in this process. There's so much content out there. There's so many things to do. We have probably a million different ideas every other day of where we want this to go. Oh, we should add this to the platform. Oh, I think we can put that in there. So this is definitely not the end of the road for us. But unfortunately, it is the end of the road for today. So if you are curious to learn more, teachmeaws.com. This is our landing page. You can say hello to our friendly friend, Blake the Beaver. As I mentioned, name, email address. You will go through that crazy verification loop to register and log in. If you don't believe anything we've set up here, you can go try it yourself and prove that it is working as expected. We do have a couple of blog posts, a couple of articles that are up there already, and definitely expect a lot more to come. And we're always open to feature requests, content requests, areas where we can help you out. I mean, we're definitely in the positions that we're in because we love connecting with the community, working with the community, and building things for all of you. So it's not about us. We're hiding behind Blake even. So feel free to check out Blake's takes, and you can kind of see, some of the things that we're building. So feel free to follow us. Again, my name is Christy Peralt. This is Matt Coulter. Our handles are up there for X, as well as you can find us pretty easily on Blue Sky and LinkedIn for our names. If you have any business-related questions you want to ask, feel free to shoot us an email, just our names at teachmeaws.com. I didn't add it on here, but Blake also has his own accounts, so feel free to check out Teach Me AWS on X, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn as well. And if anybody wants to stick around for after, we can answer any questions. We'll be around all week. We also have some Blake Teach Me stickers, if anybody would like one of those. And we may or may not have a few extra t-shirts. So depending on if you want to sign up, we'll definitely be happy to share those. But thank you so much. Thank you for listening today.